But it's not the betrayal in the family. These are people, most of the people that abuse you, us, are people that are supposed to take care of us, protect us, nurture us, teach us, and get us ready for life. And so when you're in that setting, and I I love the developmental stages of the human, actually, in the early developmental stages, because at certain times we're supposed to learn certain things. Actually, we're supposed to work through our complexes or the tension of good and bad, or being, do I feel guilty, or do I go out there and am I industrious or not, And I know you and we have taken the fast train through childhood. And somebody
Right,
asked me
exactly.
recently, we didn't stop at innocence. We didn't stop at comfort. We didn't stop at toys and goodies. And we just were in a fast train. And so there's a lot of things that we didn't even learn. And then, you know what? It's time to go back and learn them at a different place. We had bad attachments. We had fragmented attachments, insecure attachments, all sorts of kinds. But you know what I think is so much more exciting? The self-attachment. It also goes back to an older way of looking at it, and that's self-parenting.
Right,
Taking
right.
care of the self, because after a while, you become clear that you can do better than your parents, because we've learned a lot.
Absolutely. Well,
Yes.
but not without training though. That's the thing. So
Well,
I mean, because we end up, yeah. And you mentioned it in your book. By the way, uh, the
I
audience can
love
see
it.
this.
Thank
Against
you.
All Odds, yeah. So Against All Odds, by Dr. Karola Hauer, a desperate plea for human connection. So in the book, you talk about these tools that we use, or these character of how we uh, develop these tools and these traits and these character. Well, for lack of a better word, this is my word: character defect. Survival mechanisms, more
Yeah.
is what I think how you place it.
Yes.
And so,
Defense
and
mechanism.
correct. And so as we're developing these as a child, you also describe in your book that it doesn't serve us well in adulthood. So how does, a person who has come from, now you also mentioned polyvictimization. Is that am I correct in when I use that term? Is that the correct verbiage, where it's like I'm
Poly-victimizations.
right? And so these are multiple things that happen to you throughout the course of your life, where it's like there's several betrayals. Is that correct? Am I defining
Especially,
that correctly?
well, especially complex trauma actually talks about 0 to 18. So birth to 18. The
Hmm.
complexity about it is what I just mentioned, these like developmental stages that actually need to be resolved. In
Right.
general, if you have like a fancy childhood, you should be able to resolve that. You go to your parents and you say, hey, how do you deal with rejection? And the parents say, oh, this is what I do. I didn't have that, you didn't have that, a lot of people didn't have it. So that's important. Polyvictimization is also important because you and I know that it's not just the one spanking or the one
The
blow
one
up.
event. It's
It
multiple
just
events.
goes on almost every day and every night.
Right.
And
So after the ages, oh, go ahead. No,
good, now
please
you go.
finish. No, well, I was saying, so after the age of 18, when you start to get, like, for example, for
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
I delved, and this is kind of my more along my, I developed the trait of alcoholism, right? And so and as a matter of fact, I was joking with another coach in my last, and it wasn't a joke, but I have to approach it in terms of like being lighthearted and realizing that humor does help us and laughter does help us,
A
and it's also a
ton.
coping mechanism. I get it. But I was basically telling her, explaining to her that I was voted most likely to be the alcoholic out of high school. And so obviously after joining the military and being around, I learned how to drink, and it soothed me, although
Of course it did.
at that time I didn't know what it was. And I think that's how the addiction takes root, right? Because I don't have the tools to deal with the traumas and the issues that had transpired,
Absolutely.
between the ages of 1 to 18. So it's like, so when you find this new thing that makes you feel, wow, this makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, I want more. And so that's how my addiction at least began, right? It was just, a couple beers here and there, to drinking, a case in any given night, right? Or, a bar liter of booze or whatever the case may be.
Right.
So having come, through those complex traumas, right, of growing up, right? It took a while for me to come to this idea of, my own self concept. And
So
so that's where, yeah,
let
that's what I was
let's
getting to.
go there.
Exactly.
Let's go
Right.
there.
Right.
Exactly. So
Exactly. Right.
the complex trauma is between 0 and 18. The long-term consequences are as long as we live sometimes, if we get some help, no matter from what direction. If we get any help, we can change the course. But it's still time. And long-term consequences, so for example, getting away from the pain is like one of the defense mechanisms we use the most. Now, that could be by dissociating, right, and splitting up
Right.
in different parts. It can also be by changing reality, have a distorted way of looking at reality where you not you, but you plural, always come out okay. This happened because you did this, you did that. And then people do that, and it's very, very unhealthy and sad, and it doesn't give them an awful lot of friends or any kind of comfort. But they have learned in these situations to turn things around so that they are going to be okay. Those are kind of like two main directions. But you're
Right.
absolutely right. Only because the abuse stops does not mean that all of a sudden we're ready for life. We're
I'm glad
not.
you say that. I'm glad you say that because dealing. I don't know. I'm 53 now, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to deal with life. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
But there are parts of life that we're dealing with an awful lot
Uh,
better, you know?
Correct.
And it doesn't mean that we are going to be, oh, we're going to heal and we're going to forget everything that ever happened to us. In some cases, that wouldn't be bad, but it's not going to happen. What happens for us is that we heal to a degree where our narrative doesn't dictate our life anymore. And a lot of people go to alcohol and drugs out of a really poor home, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I mean, you don't learn to drink alcohol, I mean, unless it's prevalent, or use drugs unless it's prevalent in the family lineage. Like we always talk about, it's a family disease in the program of Al-Anon, right?
Right.
It's basically, it may not be your direct parental connection, but it could be your grandfather or grandmother who was the alcoholic or who was the abusive
Yes.
one. And even though the alcoholism or the drug addiction may have skipped a generation, it's the behaviors in which that gets passed down. And I
You're
could see
talking,
that. Go
yes,
ahead.
you're talking about transgenerational trauma,
Right, exactly.
where it's
So
handed down and handed down and handed down, and it can skip a generation, but you end up. So they have done a lot of research on Holocaust survivors, and the
right.
children that have never experienced it, a lot of times are very burdened with like specific trauma. They haven't experienced it, but it was handed down to them, and that's the
Well, it's in
same.
the DMA. So can you explain that part of it? Because I know you touch on it in your book, and I can't remember exactly what chapter, but you said you mentioned it like like going into the DNA. So like the trauma and the things that happened to like my grandfather, right? Like he was a World War II veteran, and so the way that I understood it is that his trauma is actually embedded in my DNA, right? And I think that's how like that's passed down from how does that work, I guess?
So I'm not the neuropsych or anything, but I have done enough research to understand that I was always thinking it may be in our DNA. It's connected to our DNA, and it's the expression of our DNA, how we express our DNA. And so that's where we can be caught in expressing it in the same way like Grandpa did. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it totally makes
but
sense.
that also means this is really, really huge because if it's the expression of the DNA, then I can also work with that. You know what I mean? Because if it were woven into the DNA, it would feel like fate. And it would feel like we can't do anything about it. you know?
Right. And that's where, okay, so like getting back to the trauma thing that's inside of what's going on in Carola or Vince or, anybody who's
Hmm.
experienced trauma or has PSD. I know in the forward section was like right out of the gate. It says, I realized that for long-term consequences of my own trauma, I had been overshadowing every aspect of my adult life, causing me to suffer for way too long. They kept me doubting, judging, mistrusting myself for as long as I could remember. Most of all, they made me feel like I did not have a real purpose in my life. Can you explain to me when you were writing that, like, walk me through that experience, so that the audience could get an idea of like
Uh-huh.
where all of this is coming from?
Well, think about it. So for 18 years, you have like horrendous things going on. You are not prepared to become a young adult. You're not prepared to have children, have relationships, or anything like that. So I was a mom at 19. I felt like somebody shoved me in a dark pond, and I had to try to do what I could. And you know what many, many, many of us do? We do everything opposite from what was done to us.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you
I
because
love
I
it.
know I
No, I
know
know you
exactly what you're talking about.
understand.
Yeah.
I know you
Yeah.
understand. I
Yeah.
read your book and I understand. And so we do everything opposite. Well, that doesn't make me like a fantastic parent either. Because
Right.
and in the meantime, the one thing that I didn't have that I have today, but I'm too old to raise young kids, is you can't regulate your emotions. So you can hold on for like I would be like okay for like 3 months and then I would blow. And
Right.
then I would be okay for 3 months and then something would just be also because you know what? One of the long-term consequences in for us complex trauma survivors is that everything feels like life or death.
Yes.
Something
Yes.
happens here, something happens there, and you're like, sure, you're gonna lose the job, you're not gonna have any money, you're gonna be homeless, you lose your kids, so this, to that, and whatever.
Or the
And
shoelace breaks and it causes you to just go
yeah,
unhinged.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you do.
Right.
Because you're like, oh my gosh, it's so interesting. Somebody just said to me, I mean, I've talked with all sorts of people. She said, you know what? I am still afraid to be found out. Found out.
Interesting.
Awesome statement. This is a woman in a
Right.
PhD program, by the way.
Right.
And she's older and she is a beautiful person. And she said, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what you mean. I think my biggest fear, and can still show up sometimes, is to be like wiped off the globe, to not have a purpose, to not have a legend, and to haven't been here. You know what I mean? Because
That
that,
I know exactly. I think that's kind of where I was going. And excuse me for interrupting, but
I love it.
that the whole thing that kind of took me over the edge, or where I had to seek help, especially 3 or 4 years ago before I went into the Al-Anon program, was the fact that I didn't have a purpose. I didn't know what my purpose was, and then all of a sudden, because I was feeding my addiction with narcissism, and then that narcissism turned into self-loathing because I couldn't manage that narcissism because that's not really who I am fundamentally.
Yeah, and
And
it's
so,
just a narcissistic trait. That
right,
doesn't mean you
exactly.
have a narcissistic disorder. And I
Correct.
want to
Right.
jump in really fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
PTSD is like a big umbrella with like a lot of like facets.
Right.
And part of those facets are anxiety, depression, chemical dependency. We can have some narcissism, we can have some
Guilty.
borderline guilty. We can have all those things happening.
Right.
We can have OCD, for example. I don't have OCD, but other people come down with OCD. And I know in the world of Al-Anon and AA and NA, a lot of people will relate to that. And then
Yeah.
they call us control freaks. We're not control freaks. We just want to be safe. And
Right. Exactly.
we want to know what's going on in our environment.
Want to have control of our environment. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely right.
So I just wanted to throw that in, that PTSD, complex trauma, and all of that, we're all unique. So let's say there's like, I don't know, 20 aspects on that umbrella. And we have certain parts It also shows up in psychological testing. For example, for me, if depression, anxiety goes up, paranoia can go up.
Interesting.
Nothing
So they're
crazy,
almost
nothing psychotic. It's
right,
just like, you know,
right,
I don't trust
like
my
the alarm
environment.
bell.
Well, it
Right,
also happens with the chemical dependency. Depression and anxiety comes up, and the chemical dependency scale comes up in the
right.
MMPI, for example. So that's so interesting to me.
Explain what the MMPI. What did you say?
MMPI is actually multiple Minnesota personality inventory. And
Oh,
it
okay. All
has
right.
like so many brackets or
Great.
criterias, and it will show you how we score. Yes, that's the
Interesting.
one where you have like the same question like coming from all sorts of different directions like a good number of times. But it will just show us there are skills. And so we can just say, how do I react? And we're going to take it to the layman level. When
Gotcha.
I get triggered by something, when I go to fight or flight or freeze or faint or PS, attach. It's so
Interesting.
interesting because now they're throwing it together with fight, flight, or freeze. Sometimes we attach out
Mm-hmm.
of our fear. And we do all sorts of things, you know? So
Right.
we just need to know, I need to know, you need to know, everybody needs to know, how do I work? That's why I like to have somebody on the outside. In groups, in individual counseling and coaching, in whatever modality works. I like to learn, how do I react, and then I can work with that, and then I can start responding. So if I know that my paranoia, just like, what if I don't have a purpose? What if nobody knows I was here? Blah, blah, blah. I can say, well, what's going on? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, that's where I was struggling, I think, the most when the nihilism started to kick in, and your book touches on this subject. That's why I was really some of the chapters I couldn't relate to because you go really really deep, which I recommend to all my listeners to look at your book because there's different circumstances. But the one after the nihilism started to kick in, then these thoughts of suicide started to creep in, and and
Absolutely.
so and so as soon as like I got to this point where it's like, what is this all worth? I don't have a purpose. It's like, why am I here? Those thoughts of suicide started to creep back in. Now 30 years earlier, when I first entered Alcoholics Anonymous 30 years ago, I was in that same place, right? I was like, what is this worth? And then you even touched on what were the words? Oh man. It's like it was suicidality and homicidality, I think was
Yes.
the other word. And
Yeah.
so it was like either way, like my mental, it was like I could go either way. I could either fly off the handle and delete somebody, or I could delete myself. And either way, I was okay with it. And so that was like when I started to get back after 30 years of thinking that I got past all of that. It was like I knew I needed to get help, and it was a small miracle. I think I was on my couch and I'd probably finished, I don't know, a bar liter of Kraken rum or something. Kraken rum and Dr. Pepper, absolutely delicious, but it'll knock you on your ass. I'll tell you what.
I would be 6 feet under.
Just absolutely amazing what I put my body through.
Well, what the
However,
body can actually withstand and
right,
can come
exactly.
back from. That's the most important message.
Well, it's the healing, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Our bodies just naturally are, if we're feeding it appropriately and correctly and are exercising it, yeah, you're absolutely right. The body can heal.